He'd never kiss you, her friend mocked, but in that green dress the Mafia boss wanted her. The city gleamed under the pale light of the moon, a labyrinth of narrow streets, cobbled alleys and towers that seemed to pierce the sky. Its heart was alive with whispers of power, secrets, and danger. Amidst this world, where the rich ruled with iron and the streets spoke in hushed tones, Leora moved with quiet grace. Tonight, she was not merely a girl from a modest family. Tonight, she was the center of her own story, draped in a green dress that shimmered like the first rays of spring sunlight. She adjusted the delicate folds of the gown and took a deep breath. Her friend Mara stood beside her, arms crossed, eyes sparkling with mischief. "You think he'll even notice you," Mara teased. "He's Vera, the man who never looks at anyone twice. He'd never kiss you, trust me." Leora smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then I'll just enjoy the night," she replied, though her heart beat a little faster than usual. She knew Mara was trying to provoke her, but the truth was, the thought of seeing Vera tonight had her nerves alight with something she could not name. The masquerade ball was held in a grand mansion, a fortress of opulence perched above the city. Candles flickered in golden sconces, throwing shadows that danced across marble floors. Leora entered through the towering doors, her green dress catching the light, drawing a few curious glances. The guests wore masks of all shapes and colors, a swirling parade of silk, jewels, and hidden intentions. And then she saw him, Vera. He stood near the balcony, tall and imposing, the room seemingly bending to his presence. His dark hair caught the soft candlelight, and his eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the crowd like a hawk. Even from across the room, Leora felt the weight of his gaze. It was not just recognition, it was a storm contained behind calm eyes. For a moment she froze. Mara nudged her. "See, he didn't even notice," she whispered, though her voice betrayed a hint of awe, but he did. Cadden's attention lingered on the emerald shimmer of her dress, on the gentle curve of her shoulders, on the quiet confidence she radiated despite the nervous energy she tried to mask. Something stirred in him, a spark of curiosity that he had long thought dead. Leora moved through the crowd, heart hammering, unsure if she wanted to flee or step closer. Guests approached her, complimented her, but she barely heard them. All she could feel was the pull of his presence, the invisible thread that seemed to tug at her very soul. The night deepened, the music swelling into a soft, haunting waltz. Leora found herself near the grand staircase, catching her breath. That's when he stepped closer. Cadden's approach was effortless, controlled. He stopped just a few feet away, his expression unreadable, though his dark eyes betrayed a hint of something unfamiliar, curiosity, perhaps even admiration. "You are luminous tonight," he said, his voice low, smooth, carrying an authority that made her pulse quicken. Leora swallowed, trying to steady her voice. "Thank you, sir." Cadden's lips twitched into the smallest of smiles. "Sir," he repeated, "I would like to know your name." "Leora," she answered, feeling the name vibrate strangely in the air between them. "Leora," he repeated, savoring it, "a name that suits you like the first leaf of spring." Her cheeks warmed at the metaphor. She did not know if it was flattery or some strange instinct that drew him to her, but she felt it, the pull, undeniable and dangerous. "May I have this dance?" Cadden asked, extending his hand. The room seemed to fade around them, the music dimming as though the world itself had narrowed to this moment. Leora hesitated, glancing at Mara, who was watching with wide, excited eyes. Then slowly she placed her hand in his. The dance began. It was not just a dance of movement but a dance of tension, a silent conversation filled with curiosity, attraction, and caution. Cadden's hand on her waist was firm but not possessive, guiding her effortlessly. Leora matched his steps, feeling the strange thrill of power in the touch that was neither violent nor threatening, but commanding. "You are brave," Cadden said quietly as they moved across the floor. "Most would not dare enter my world so openly." Leora lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. And most would not invite danger so openly, she countered, her voice steady, though her heart raced. Cadden's lips curved slightly, and for a brief moment the room around them seemed to hold its breath. He was used to control, to fear, to obedience, yet Leora was none of these. She was a challenge, a spark, a force that he had not anticipated. The waltz ended, but neither moved away. The world returned around them, the music, the guests, the flickering candlelight, but a new tension lingered, an invisible thread connecting them. Mara approached, trying to hide her excitement. "You survived," she whispered, eyes darting between Leora and Cadden. "Barely." Leora laughed softly, feeling the electricity of the moment settle like a low flame in her chest. "I think I might like him," she admitted, though the words felt dangerous. Cadden, overhearing her, raised an eyebrow, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "Do you think I would like you in return?" His voice was playful, but the edge beneath it spoke of power, danger, and secrets. Before Leora could answer, a commotion erupted at the far end of the hall. Guests gasped and whispered, and a shadow moved among them, a figure that clearly did not belong, bringing with it a threat that Leora could not yet name. Cadden's attention snapped to the intrusion. The storm she had sensed within him earlier flared, sharp and commanding. He stepped closer to Leora, placing a protective hand lightly on her elbow. Not enough to restrain her, but enough to let her feel that he was there, that she was seen, and that in his world she had just become important. The figure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving the room buzzing with murmurs. Leora's pulse raced, a mix of fear and exhilaration. "Why did you come here?" Cadden asked softly, as he guided her toward a quieter corner. His eyes, dark and unreadable, studied her. "This world is dangerous. You do not belong in it, yet you walk through it with courage I have rarely seen." Leora met his gaze, a small smile playing on her lips. "Perhaps I wanted to see the danger," she replied. "Perhaps I wanted to see you." The moment hung between them, electric and unspoken. She knew something had shifted, a thread had been pulled, a spark had ignited. Cadden's jaw tightened, as though he was fighting the pull he felt toward her. He had always controlled his life, his empire, and his heart. Yet here was someone who challenged that control without even trying. "I should leave," Leora whispered, though part of her did not want to move. "Not yet," he said, his tone firm, commanding, yet strangely tender. "Not yet." And then, before either could speak again, the music shifted to a soft, haunting melody. Guests began to pair off, laughter and conversation filling the air. But Leora felt as though the world had narrowed again, to the green shimmer of her dress, the dark pull of his gaze, and the unspoken promise of something dangerous, exhilarating, and entirely new. As she looked at him, Leora realized that Mara had been wrong. Cadden Vera would notice her. He had noticed her, and tonight, in that emerald dress, she had stepped into a world she barely understood, a world of power, secrets, and desire. The night stretched on, the moon tracing its path across the sky. Leora and Cadden remained within each other's orbit, words few but meaning many. Every glance, every gesture, spoke of curiosity, of challenge, and of the beginnings of something neither could name. And as the ball drew to a close, Leora knew one thing with certainty: nothing in her life would ever be the same. The pull between them had been set into motion, a silent promise of danger, longing, and perhaps, in time, love. But even as she left the ballroom, the city's shadows stretching around her like dark velvet, she felt a shiver of anticipation. This was only the beginning. Because in that green dress, under the watchful eyes of the city's dark king, Leora had awakened something in Cadden Vera, and perhaps something in herself she had never known existed. Cliffhanger, and somewhere in the silent corners of the mansion, Cadden watched her leave, his mind restless. For the first time in years, he felt desire stir without control, a dangerous, irresistible desire that whispered of challenges, secrets, and a future neither of them could yet see. The morning after the masquerade ball, the city seemed different. The streets, usually cold and indifferent, held a quiet hum, as if the night had left behind whispers in every corner. Leora walked through the narrow alleys toward her small apartment, the green dress from the ball folded neatly in her arms. Her heart still raced when she thought of Caden Vera, the man whose gaze had lingered on her longer than anyone had ever dared. But the day held no comfort. A shadow followed her steps, not a person, but a feeling, heavy and uneasy. The city had a way of reminding those who walked in light that darkness always lingered nearby. When she arrived at her apartment, she found it unchanged, the familiar smell of old wood and fresh bread from the market below. Yet, the sense of being watched did not leave. Leora shook her head, trying to dismiss it as nerves. After all, the night had been exciting, but she was just a girl in a dangerous city. Caden Vera might notice her once, but she would vanish from his world as easily as a shadow. She was wrong. That evening a message arrived, delivered by a discreet courier. No stamp, no signature, only a small note written in dark ink. "Meet me, midnight, my mansion." Caden, Leora's breath caught. She read the note again, then pressed it to her chest. Part of her wanted to ignore it. She was cautious by nature, and Caden's world was one built of whispers, threats, and power. But another part, a part she did not fully understand, urged her forward. That part wanted to see him again. Night fell over the city like a velvet curtain. Lanterns flickered along the streets, and the air smelled of rain and stone. Leora approached Caden's mansion once more, feeling the same mixture of fear and excitement she had felt at the ball. The doors opened silently before she could knock, and she was led into the grand hall, where the chandeliers cast golden reflections on the marble floor. Caden was waiting. His dark eyes studied her as she entered, expression unreadable. "You came," he said, almost a statement, not a question. "I did," Leora replied. Her voice was steady, though her pulse raced. Caden gestured toward the balcony, where the moonlight spilled in, painting silver lines across the floor. "You walk into my world willingly," he said. "Few have the courage, few even survive the first night." "I am not afraid," Leora said, though a small part of her whispered that she should be. Caden's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "Bravery is admirable, but foolishness is not." They moved through the mansion, a silent understanding guiding their steps. Leora noticed details she had missed before, the way shadows gathered in the corners, the faint echo of footsteps in empty halls, the heavy curtains that seemed to hide secrets. This was a place of power, and Caden ruled it with an iron will. Yet there was a strange intimacy in the quiet moments between them, a tension that neither fully understood. Then the attack came. A sudden noise, a crash of glass in the west wing, broke the calm. Leora's heart leapt into her throat. Without thinking, she moved toward it, only to be intercepted by Caden's hand on her arm. "Stay here," he commanded. There was no anger, only control, and a depth of authority that made Leora hesitate. Caden disappeared into the shadows. Minutes passed. Leora could hear muffled shouts and the scuffle of feet. Her mind raced, imagining all the dangers that could be unfolding. Then Caden returned, a faint line of dust on his dark coat, a hand slightly bruised. "Are you unharmed?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost vulnerable. "Yes," Leora said, though her knees felt weak. Caden studied her, a strange intensity in his gaze. "You should not have come here tonight," he said. "This is not a world meant for people like you." "I wanted to see you," she whispered. His eyes softened just slightly, and the cold, calculating mask he wore slipped for a moment. "And now you have," he said. The tension between them had changed. It was no longer merely curiosity or attraction. It had become something sharper, deeper, the weight of danger shared, the pull of understanding, and the undeniable spark of connection. In the quiet moments afterward, Leora explored the mansion under his watchful eye. Each room held history, power, and secrets. She learned of the guards, the private libraries, and the hallways that led to hidden chambers. And with every step, she felt herself drawn closer to Cadden, the man who terrified the city, and yet now showed her glimpses of something else, perhaps even humanity. "Why do you let me see this side of you?" she asked quietly, pausing in a grand library filled with ancient texts. "Because few ever ask," he replied, "and fewer still are brave enough to stay when they see it." She looked at him, noticing the shadows under his eyes, the faint tension in his jaw. "Is it loneliness?" Cadden laughed softly, a sound rare and musical. "Loneliness, yes, but also responsibility. Power is not freedom, Leora. It is chains dressed as choice. And those who hold it must bear the weight alone." Leora's chest tightened. She understood, perhaps more than she wanted to admit. In her own life, she had known small chains, family expectations, societal rules, limits she could not easily break. But Cadden carried chains that were heavier, darker, and far more permanent. "I want to help," she said, her voice firm. "Not to control, not to change, just to be here." Cadden's eyes softened again. "You do not know what you are offering," he said, a shadow of caution returning. "This world will not forgive weakness, and you are strong, but you are not invincible." Leora met his gaze steadily. "Then I will learn." For the first time in years, Cadden felt a tremor of something unfamiliar, hope. Not for power, not for control, but for connection. For someone who could see him, truly see him, and remain standing. Days passed. Leora returned home each evening, yet her thoughts never left Cadden's mansion. She wondered about his past, the life he had led, the darkness that seemed to follow him like a shadow. She wondered if she was foolish for stepping so fully into his world, and yet she could not stay away. One evening, as the city slept under a blanket of mist, Leora returned once more to the mansion. Cadden was waiting in the courtyard, hands tucked into his coat pockets. The moonlight caught the sharp lines of his face, and the shadows of the garden danced around him. "You should not have come alone," he said. "I am not afraid," Leora replied, though a shiver of cold and anticipation ran down her spine. Cadden's eyes darkened slightly, a storm beneath the calm. "You may think that, but fear is not always visible. It hides in hearts and whispers in silence. You walk too close to it, yet you do not see it." Leora stepped closer. "I see enough," she said. "And I trust enough to step forward anyway." Cadden studied her, the silence stretching between them. Then slowly he extended his hand. "Come with me. Tonight you will see more than just halls and gardens. You will see the true shadow of this city, and the chains that bind me to it." The night was cold, yet the air between them carried a heat that was not of the sun. They moved through secret passages, hidden staircases, and chambers that smelled of age and power. Leora felt a mixture of awe and fear, yet Cadden's presence beside her was oddly comforting. He was dangerous, yes, but in his own way, protective. Finally, they reached a small balcony overlooking the city. The streets below were empty, silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. "Do you see it?" Cadden asked, voice low. "The city, beautiful and cruel, bound by fear and desire. This is my world, and now, in a way, it is yours too." Leora looked out, taking in the glittering lights and shadows. She felt the weight of his words, the pull of the life he offered, thrilling, dangerous, and utterly consuming. "I see it," she said softly, "and I want to understand it, to be here with you." Cadden's hand brushed hers, tentative but deliberate. The contact sent a shiver through her, a spark that neither denied nor fully acknowledged. It was not just attraction, it was trust, daring, and the fragile beginnings of connection. But as they stood there, a sudden sound shattered the quiet, a distant shout, a movement in the shadows below. Cadden's gaze snapped toward it, dark and alert. Leora's heart leapt. Danger was near, and the city had not forgotten that night's events. Cadden's jaw tightened, his hand gripping hers for a brief instant before letting go. "You should leave," he said, voice hard, commanding. "This world is not kind to those who linger too long in the shadows." "I am not afraid," Leora said again, stepping closer despite the warning in his tone. For a moment he said nothing. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry years of burden, he nodded. Very well, but know this: once you step further into this world, there is no turning back. You will see darkness, you will feel fear, and yet you may also find strength you never knew existed. Leora met his gaze, unwavering. Then I am ready. And in that moment, under the pale glow of the moon, the threads of fate tightened around them. The danger that had followed her from the ball now seemed closer, sharper, more urgent. But so too did the bond between them, fragile, tentative, yet undeniably real. Cliffhanger. As they turned back toward the mansion, a shadow slipped silently across the rooftops. Someone watched them, and their intentions were anything but kind. The night was far from over, and the city's darkness had only just begun to reveal itself. The city slept under a blanket of mist, but Leora could not. Thoughts of the shadow that had followed them the night before lingered, twisting through her mind like a restless wind. She knew the danger was real. The city did not forgive carelessness, and Cadden's world was one that few survived unscathed. Yet beneath the fear, a strange thrill stirred. She had stepped into the unknown, and for the first time she felt truly alive. When she arrived at the mansion, the gates were open, welcoming her into the labyrinth of power and secrets she had begun to understand. Cadden awaited her in the courtyard, leaning against the cold stone railing, his dark eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting trouble at every turn. "You came," he said, his voice calm, though a tension threaded through it. "I did," Leora replied, her breath steady. "I cannot stay away, even if it is dangerous." Cadden's gaze softened, and for a brief moment he allowed himself to simply watch her, the green dress she wore again catching the pale moonlight. "You are brave, perhaps more than I anticipated," he murmured. The silence stretched, carrying with it the weight of everything unspoken, fear, longing, and the invisible chains that bound both of them. Then, with deliberate caution, he spoke again. "Tonight, you will see more of my world. Not just the walls, the halls, or the guards, but the truth of why this life has no room for weakness." Leora nodded, her resolve firm. "I am ready." They moved through the mansion, passing rooms she had never seen. Hidden staircases led them downward, to chambers carved into the stone foundations. The air smelled of age, secrecy, and something faintly metallic, a reminder of the dangers that existed just beyond sight. "You trust me," Cadden said suddenly, his tone soft but searching. "I do," Leora answered without hesitation. Cadden's eyes darkened, conflicted. Trust was not something he offered lightly. He had been betrayed too many times, lost too much. Yet here was someone who did not falter, someone who dared to meet his gaze and remain standing. Their journey led them to a room filled with ancient books, maps, and letters. The dim light of lanterns cast shadows on the walls, creating patterns that danced like restless spirits. Leora ran her fingers over the spines of the books, sensing the weight of history contained within them. "This is where I plan," Cadden explained. "Where I anticipate threats, calculate risks, and try to control the chaos that surrounds me. And yet," he paused, looking at her, "even I cannot control everything." Leora sensed the vulnerability in his voice, a rare glimpse behind the mask of the city's feared ruler. "You do not have to control everything," she said gently. "Not when you have allies who care." Cadden studied her, and for a fleeting moment the usual hardness in his eyes softened. "You do not know what you are offering," he said. "To walk into my life is to face danger every day, and yet you remain." "I remain," Leora said firmly. "Because I want to understand, to help, and to be part of something greater than fear." Cadden let out a long, quiet sigh. "Perhaps that is what makes you different," he murmured. "Most people flee when faced with darkness. You walk toward it." Their conversation was interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps in the hallway outside. Both turned, instincts sharpened. Shadows moved against the walls, and a figure emerged. One of Cadden's trusted allies, a young man with a wary expression. They have noticed us, he said quietly. The rival faction, they are growing bolder, they have eyes everywhere. Cadden's jaw tightened. Then we prepare, but you, he said, turning to Leora, must stay close. Danger follows those who step too far into my world. Leora nodded, feeling the thrill of fear and excitement intertwining. She did not falter. This was not just about survival. It was about connection, about walking beside someone who carried the weight of power and shadows alike. Night deepened, and they moved through the mansion again, this time into the gardens. The moonlight painted silver patterns on the leaves, creating a magical, almost otherworldly scene. Cadden walked beside her, not touching, not guiding, yet the presence of him was enough to steady her nerves. "Do you ever wish for something else?" Leora asked quietly, her eyes on the glowing paths of the garden. "A life without shadows, without power, without fear." Cadden's lips pressed into a thin line. "I have long ago stopped wishing," he admitted. "The life I lead, it demands sacrifices. Dreams are dangerous when you cannot protect them." Leora looked at him, her heart aching with empathy. "And yet I see in you a longing, a hope you try to hide." For a moment, Cadden said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed softly, a sound so rare that Leora felt it vibrate deep in her chest. "Perhaps," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "I have not entirely forgotten what hope feels like." The intimacy of the moment, shared under the moonlight, created a fragile bond between them. It was not words or promises that tied them together, but the unspoken understanding of their struggles, fears, and desires. Suddenly, the tranquility was broken by a soft rustling in the trees. Cadden stiffened, his instincts sharp as ever. Leora instinctively stepped closer, feeling the tension in his movements. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his tone firm but not unkind. Leora did as he said, heart pounding, aware that danger was always close when one walked in Cadden's world. They moved carefully through the shadows, and Cadden's hand brushed against hers for a brief moment, not a touch of romance, but a touch of protection. The simple gesture sent a shiver through her, a reminder that trust and danger could coexist in strange ways. They reached a small pavilion in the garden, a place of quiet and reflection. Cadden leaned against a pillar, his eyes distant. "Do you understand now?" he asked softly. "The city, the threats, the responsibilities, all of it. This is the life I lead." Leora nodded. "I do. And I am not afraid. I will face it with you." The words hung in the air, fragile and powerful. Cadden's gaze softened again, the usual hardness replaced by something tender, almost vulnerable. "You are reckless," he said with a faint smile. "But perhaps that is what makes you remarkable." Hours passed in quiet conversation, laughter, and shared silences. They spoke of dreams, fears, and moments from the past that had shaped them. Leora learned of Cadden's childhood, a life of expectation, betrayal, and lessons learned too harshly. She understood the man he had become, not merely the feared ruler of the city's shadows, but someone shaped by loss, duty, and survival. "You have seen too much," Cadden said finally, his tone thoughtful. "And yet you remain. Why?" "Because I believe there is more to you than fear and power," Leora replied. "Because I see the man behind the mask and I want to help him find light." Cadden's gaze softened, and for a moment the weight of the world seemed to lift from his shoulders. "Perhaps," he whispered, "you are the first person in years who has truly seen me, and perhaps you are the only one I could let see this side of me without fear." The night's stillness was shattered once more, this time by the distant sound of movement outside the garden walls. Cadden's expression hardened, his eyes sharp and alert. Danger was never far away, and the city's shadows did not forgive mistakes. "You should go," he said, voice low but commanding. "This world is not kind, and there are those who will not hesitate to harm you if they see weakness." "I am not afraid," Leora said again, stepping closer despite the warning in his tone. Cadden studied her for a long moment, a storm of emotions crossing his features, desire, caution, protectiveness, and something softer, almost hope. "Very well," he said finally. "But know this, once you step further into my world, there is no turning back. You will face darkness, but you will also find strength you never knew you had." Leora met his gaze, unwavering. "Then I am ready." For the first time, Cadden allowed himself to feel something he had long buried, the possibility of connection, of redemption, and of trust. The bond between them, fragile but undeniable, had begun to grow stronger, forged in the fires of danger and shared understanding. Cliffhanger. Just as they turned back toward the mansion, a figure appeared in the shadows, barely visible under the moonlight. Their presence was deliberate, silent, and threatening. Leora and Cadden both sensed it immediately. The night was far from over, and the dangers of the city were closing in faster than either of them had anticipated. The night was heavy with mist as Leora and Cadden moved through the quiet streets of the city. The shadows seemed alive, whispering secrets, warning of dangers that lurked around every corner. Leora's heart pounded, not from fear alone, but from the pull she felt toward Cadden, the strange, dangerous, and yet comforting bond that had grown between them over these past days. They had barely returned to the mansion after the events in the garden when the shadow from before appeared again. This time, it was no longer subtle. Figures moved in the alleyways, silent but purposeful. Leora realized that the rival faction had grown bolder, daring to test Cadden's reach and strength. Cadden's expression hardened. The calm, controlled mask he always wore had fallen away, replaced by a storm of vigilance and fury. "Stay close to me," he instructed, voice low and commanding. "Do not stray. They are dangerous and their intentions are clear." Leora nodded, the thrill of fear coursing through her like fire. She had never known anything like this, but she also felt ready. She had chosen to be here, to walk beside a man who carried the weight of shadows and power, and she would not turn away. The alleyways led them to a hidden courtyard, a place few in the city knew existed. Moonlight spilled over stone fountains and overgrown gardens, creating a surreal, almost magical scene. But the beauty was deceptive. The rival faction had anticipated their movements, and figures stepped from the shadows, surrounding them silently. Cadden's gaze swept the area. "You will not harm her," he said sharply, his voice echoing in the stillness. "She is under my protection." One of the figures stepped forward, hooded and silent. The tension in the air was sharp, almost tangible. Leora felt her pulse quicken, but she did not panic. She had learned from Cadden to trust, to observe, to be aware of danger without letting it consume her. Cadden moved in front of her, his stance protective but not aggressive. He was always in control, always calculating. Leora felt the pull of his presence, the invisible shield he created simply by standing there. For a moment, she saw not the feared Mafia boss of the city, but a man who would do anything to protect those he cared about. The figure spoke at last, voice low and measured. "We do not seek unnecessary blood, Vera, but this city belongs to those who can hold it. Step aside and no one will be harmed." Cadden's eyes narrowed. "Step aside," he repeated, incredulous. "This city has rules, but it does not bow to threats. You test me at your own peril." Leora reached out, touching his arm lightly. "Cadden, we can resolve this," she said, "without more danger." For a brief moment, the man in the shadows hesitated. Leora's calm courage, her willingness to step forward despite fear, seemed to ripple through the tension in the courtyard. She had learned to stand strong beside him, and now that strength was visible to others. Cadden's expression softened just slightly as he looked at her. "You have learned well," he murmured. "Bravery, wisdom, and calm in the face of threat, rare qualities in this city." He turned back to the intruders, and the air seemed to shift. Cadden spoke with a mixture of authority and calculated negotiation, using his reputation, intelligence, and understanding of human nature to diffuse the situation without unnecessary conflict. The hooded figures, sensing that they could not win against both the mind and the presence of Cadden, slowly withdrew, disappearing into the shadows as silently as they had arrived. Leora exhaled, her body relaxing for the first time in hours. The danger was gone for now, but the city's darkness had reminded her that Cadden's world was never without risk. Cadden turned to her, his eyes softer now, revealing a vulnerability he rarely showed anyone. "You are remarkable, Leora," he said quietly. "You walk willingly into my world and yet you remain unbroken. That is something rare." Leora smiled faintly. "You are remarkable too," she said. "You protect what matters even when the world is against you, and even when it is not easy to do so." For a long moment they stood in silence, the cool night air wrapping around them. In that quiet, the distance that had always existed between their worlds seemed to shrink. Danger had not disappeared, but a bond had formed, strong, tentative, and real. They returned to the mansion together, walking through the halls that had become familiar. The chandeliers cast golden reflections on the marble floors, the same way they had the night of the ball. Leora felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. She had stepped into a world of shadows, and yet she felt at home here, not because of the power, but because of the connection she shared with Cadden. Cadden led her to the balcony overlooking the city, a place they had often retreated to in the quiet hours of the night. The moonlight illuminated her green dress, making it shimmer softly, like an echo of hope in a world often ruled by darkness. "You have changed things," Cadden said quietly, his gaze on her. "Not the city, not the shadows, but me. You have reminded me that there is more to life than fear and control." Leora stepped closer. "And you have reminded me that strength is not just about courage in battle. It is about trust, care, and protecting what matters." The air between them was charged with unspoken words, longings, and the fragile beginnings of love. It was not a love born of ease or comfort, but of understanding, respect, and the shared experience of facing darkness together. Cadden reached out, his hand brushing hers. The touch was gentle, deliberate, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had formed. "I cannot promise the world will be safe," he said, voice low, "but I can promise that I will not let it harm you if I can prevent it." Leora's heart swelled. "I trust you," she whispered, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Not because you are strong, but because you are willing to be more than fear, more than power." Cadden's gaze softened, and he allowed himself to step closer, closing the space between them. The tension that had always existed, a mixture of desire, caution, and longing, now shifted into something tender, something real. For the first time, they allowed themselves to feel what had been growing silently: connection, respect, and the beginnings of love. Cadden leaned down slightly and Leora met him halfway, their foreheads touching in a gesture of trust and intimacy. "You are the first person who has truly seen me," he murmured. "And perhaps the only one I could allow to see this side of me without fear." "I see you," Leora replied softly, "and I will not turn away." The city stretched beneath them, silent in the night, as if holding its breath. The dangers had not disappeared, but the bond between Leora and Cadden had grown stronger, forged through challenges, fear, and the courage to step into darkness together. Hours passed in quiet conversation, shared laughter and reflective silences. They spoke of dreams and past burdens, of moments that had shaped them, and of hopes that had long been forgotten. Through it all, they realized that their connection was no longer just curiosity or attraction. It was something deeper, something enduring. "You are not just remarkable," Cadden said finally, voice soft. "You are necessary, not to my power but to my heart." Leora smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. "And you are necessary to mine," she replied. "Not because you are strong, but because you have allowed yourself to be more than fear." For a long moment they stood in silence, letting the night hold them. Then slowly, Cadden reached out, taking her hand fully in his. The touch was firm, protective, and tender all at once. And then, finally, the moment arrived, the culmination of the tension, trust, and connection that had grown between them. Cadden leaned closer, and Leora felt the warmth of his presence, the promise of protection, and the tenderness he rarely allowed himself to show. Their lips met in a gentle, deliberate kiss, a symbol of trust, connection, and the fragile beginnings of a love forged through danger, understanding, and shared courage. It was a kiss that carried no rush, no recklessness, only the quiet intensity of two hearts meeting after trials, challenges, and mutual recognition. When they parted slightly, their foreheads rested together, breaths mingling, hearts aligned. The city below remained silent, but for Leora and Cadden the night had changed forever. "You have changed everything," Cadden murmured, voice low but steady. "And you have shown me what it means to truly trust," Leora replied. The green dress shimmered in the moonlight, a symbol of beginnings, courage, and hope. The world remained dangerous, shadows still lingered, and challenges would arise. But for the first time, Leora and Cadden knew that together they could face anything. The night stretched on, silent except for the soft whispers of the city. And in that quiet they understood. The darkness could never erase the bond they had formed, nor the light they had discovered in each other. Ending cliffhanger resolution. As dawn approached, the first rays of sunlight touched the city, casting golden light over the rooftops. Leora adjusted her green dress and looked at Cadden. This time, she did not feel fear or hesitation. She stepped beside him, ready to face the world together. The city was still dangerous, the shadows still long, but they had found something stronger: trust, connection, and a love that could survive even the darkest nights. And so, under the first morning light, they began a new chapter, one of partnership, courage, and the quiet promise that together they could face whatever the world had in store.